Hello, everyone. Welcome to Unsolicited Press's Literary Nights with Unsolicited Press. I'm your host, Rosalia Scalia, and tonight joining us are three authors who have exciting works forthcoming either in February or March of this year. Before we get started, I would like to remind you to smash that like button and also subscribe to Unsolicited Press's channel. Tonight we have three authors. Uh, Joining us are Lara Lillibridge, David Nash, and Doug Cole. Each of them are seasoned writers, and there's two fiction writers here and a nonfiction writer. So we are going to hear a little bit of each person's book. And then after that, we hope to have a lively discussion about the books and about the writing process and about things literary. So, welcome and join us. Hello, everyone. How are you this evening?
Hello, good evening. Doing great.
Hey. So, I think we're going to go in alphabetical order and we're going to start with Doug Cole this evening. So, if you could talk a little bit about your book and that's forthcoming, and a little bit about some of the other books that you have out there, and then read your piece, and then we'll move to Laura and then David. So, let's begin.
Sure. Hey, thank you for having me here. And it's wonderful to be representing Unsolicited Press, too. I've worked with them. Well, one of the books I'm reading from is The Gold Tooth and the Crooked Smile of God. This actually came out in 2019. The book I have that's forthcoming will be coming a little later than March. I'm coming out more around August. I'm sort of a last minute addition landing on this boat. And that one is called the Cabin at the End of the World. I know you can't see that, but that's going to be the one that's forthcoming. And I've loved working with Unsolicited Press. Terrific editors, oh, magnificent. And a lot of collaboration. The cover of this one is actually, these are paintings that were done by my son, my older son. He's quite a talented artist. Anyway, and so I'll just read a couple of poems from this. These are poetry too, by the way, but I do have fiction. But my novel was published with another press.
Okay, well,
let's
hear some poetry.
Place. Yeah. So we'll stay with Unsolicited Press material. All right. So this is a poem out of my book, Gold Tooth and the Crooked Smile of God. It's called Blackfish. The hill people trickle in from their blind hollows in the back roads under camouflaged tarp covers deep in the cedar groves. They've come to town in their finery and smoke-soaked coats, drinking, laughing bigger and louder than ever, while beauty appears and crosses the street to the Salvation Army in Morton on Saturday night. Morton is a little town in eastern Washington. Well, south, a little bit east too. All right, this one's called Father and Son. My father took us to the lake. His friend had a cabin there. We fished, we swam. His friend had a son my age, a big dumb kid with stupid eyes and a slow, brutish way. My father and his friend drank beers and whiskey and smoked cigars. The mosquitoes were thick in the air. His friend brought out some boxing gloves and told me and his son to put them on. I fought the big dumb kid, while Dad's friend hit a bottle with a knife to start and stop the rounds. The big kid hit hard. I didn't let on. I could see my drunk father was proud that I was sticking it out, fighting against his friend's son, that I took a hit and kept on going, that I fought on with the smell of beer and cigars like in a real boxing ring. Yeah, I stole some rhythm from W.B. Yeats for that one. All right, this is a poem called Monday. That horrible sound of a floor polisher, a leaf blower, a jackhammer in the cold, dark morning as we climb onto buses and the mortuary burns, and buildings that were never meant to last tremble on their blocks, the earth opening beneath us as we fall like maple seeds into that great black open mouth of the void, with, believe it or not, a sense of relief, only to drop right back into office cubicles with droppings on the tabletops and whistles and time clocks, eyes watching, and the big boss saying, "Get back to work." That's how I used to feel about Mondays. I don't really feel that way anymore.
That's it. I think a lot of people might feel that way about Mondays.
Yeah, it lingers. This one's called The Laugh. There's that laugh. It's a guy's laugh. It's a take over the room laugh. It's elbows, and that's the way it is, and dirt under the nails, beer at the Blue Eagle Cafe, baseball cap and cigarettes laugh. It's a pool shot and a worn wallet curved to the shape of the ass, with a flattened condom and creased pictures of the kids, receipts and credit cards laugh. It's bare trees and a wave storm demolishing the beach. It's a moving truck loaded to the gills, the one who got away and the one just out of reach. Trivia night at Christo's bar, notes on a napkin, plans for a screenplay, big dreams in a shot glass, exploding and going nowhere, full of life. Laugh. All right. Now I'm going to read a couple of poems out of the forthcoming book, The Cabin at the End of the World, which this work, somebody reading it dubbed it dirty surrealism. I'm not really sure what that is, but it seems to fit. All right, this one's called A Game of Chicken. When the train still came through town along Sandpoint Way up at the north end of the lake, we used to swing out on a rope tied to a tree branch above the tracks in a game called Chicken. And one boy named Stuart, who was often hounded by the pack, timid, backed away up the muddy hillside until, taunted one day, he at last took hold of the frayed rope just as the engine passed, and we watched him arc out like we had done. But at that point, directly over the train, he turned to face us. And what can I say about that expression and the way it seemed like a final blow as he let go or slipped? Who could know? And was carried off. And we scattered fast and only heard the rest of the story later on the news. But among us, we never said a word about it, ever.
Wow.
Dirty surrealism seems like a good word for that. All right. I'll read you another poem. Another poem here from this collection. It's called The Companion. I'm traveling along the bloodstream of this building and going down every corridor looking for the unseen, terrible heart that keeps this going. I want to stab it with pens and cabinet rods until dying it takes with it that rushing black sound of the void as I step into a new spring field of wet grass and the lush melting ice dew, soaking your legs as you move on and look and think you see by the green eyes and the sheen of a black coat a panther that you follow with your heart beating fast. And I'm here waiting where you find the little black ink spot at the back of awareness you pick at and pull open, rending a self you believed in the process, the moment so much like a death, but realizing you're just being born. Dirty surrealism for sure. All right. I'm just going to read one more and then a slightly longer piece. These are mostly prose poems too, by the way, that in this more current edition, the Cabin at the End of the World. I was going for more prose poetry, and you know, you'd see it on the page more than hear it maybe, but it's an element of what's going on here. Okay, this one's a short one called Getting Yourself Home. I'm walking home from Charlie and Yumi's house, maybe after 1, mist sliding through the live oak trees, and I'm figuring out the geometry involved where Virginia Street and Euclid Avenue meet. Orange fuzz extends in all directions. Can you imagine how quiet it is? That's why I'm so surprised when a police appear and they roll down a window and say, "Hey, you hear anyone screaming?" How can he be so calm? Caterpillars crawling on his face. Imagine a power lifter doing a clean and jerk, bar loaded to twice his weight, and you might get an idea just what it takes for me to open my mouth and say, no. The patrol car slithers off, blue light burning a trail that feels like static electricity as I pass through it. All right, this last piece I'm going to read to you is called Casino People, a slightly longer poem. A good way to start, kind of end with this, a taste of this collection. All right. The angel of the winds and heat devils appear on a highway going nowhere, and there, a fallen farmhouse crushed as though sky pushed down from above and ground pushed up from below. Timbers snapping, swallows like souls bursting through the doors. I know these people living out here. The call it the spread. And having a horse is a true identity. Most are working in shops or drive truck or are now on disability, but say they work the land. They wear cowboy boots and jeans, give you Jack and Coke when you're 17, and don't bat an eye when you start smoking. They're not religious, but if you aren't Christian, you're pretty suspicious. They want homes set back from the road with room for goats and guns, new tires, new transmission, a local bar to watch the game in, a solid retirement or government pension, and good television reception. They respect the man with a clean haircut and a straight stack of wood, make it part of a birthday celebration to burn the back field brush and float down river in inner tubes with coolers full of American beer. Follow high school sports to see who punches through to the big leagues, sneer down those who leave and shake their heads at those who never go. Break out snow tires and chains when it's winter. Respect the cocktail hour. Watch black and white movies for cultural history. Play Tammy Wynette, Waylon Jennings, drive pickups, and get tattoos of Jesus on their biceps. Too much? No way, you say. That all sounds like sad stereotypes, but I know. I live among them. Uncle Billy with big gut he'd slap and call his investment went out fast by heart attack at 48. Gentry made it nearly 70, but after a lifetime of cigarettes and exposure to asbestos from his time in the Navy, he got cancer. The worst thing he said at the end were the constant hiccups. Hard by 30 with relentless debt, foreclosures, lost weekends in roadside motels or the big lake cabins. Savings gambled away. We go down a misty trail, Crazy Joe waving at the headlights saying, never be in a hurry and you'll always be on time. As meadowlarks come alive and the angel of the winds arise, lifting the broken bones of a farmhouse and a swirl of swallows, earth pushing up, something else pushing down from the sky. Thank you. I feel like that's a good place to turn the camera over, pass the baton on to our next reader. Thank you for having me.
And stay, we'll follow by our Q&A later. Thank you so much for reading your poetry. And Lara, how would you like to begin your readings?
So my essay collection is called The Truth About Unringing Phones, and it comes out March 5th of this year. And I don't have a cover yet to show you. I don't have an actual book, but it's phenomenal. And anyway, this is a fragmented collection with a lot of short essays. Some of them are not even a page long, and some of them are several pages. But so I'm going to read you a selection of them, starting with the introduction. When I was 4 years old, my father moved from Rochester, New York to Anchorage, Alaska, a distance of over 4,000 miles. I spent my childhood chasing after him, flying a quarter of the way around the world to tug at the hem of his jacket and beg him to look at me. As I aged, my adoration of my father and longing for him was layered over with anger, revulsion, and later pity like a hand-dipped candle. These new emotions fusing with, but not placing, the yearning which remained at my core. My father is in his 80s. Parkinson's has left him with an unstable gait. An old neck injury rendered his voice quiet and raspy. Dementia comes and goes and stays longer each time. My father is a lonely old man, and society says I should be a dutiful daughter. But the only way I've survived my father was to cut myself off from him, having only the most superficial of interactions. This book is my attempt to weigh responsibility versus self-preservation. The truth about unringing phones. My father didn't know I walked away from him. I just stopped answering the phone, stopped scheduling visits, stopped pretending. It took him years to notice I was gone. Now he is the one who sits beside an unringing phone. He's no longer daddy, just a father I used to know. Old, broken down, his head filled with memories crumbling to shards. Flashes of images put together with the wrong names attached. I struggle not to call. Calling only opens wounds that are scabbed but not yet scarred. I don't call and pretend I don't want to. He calls and I don't answer. His time remaining is short. This is the last chance for what I never had, but I already know I will never get more than I have now. The only surprise is that I suddenly care again, years after walling off my heart. I blame Christmas, but that's not it. I only ever saw him at the holidays twice in my entire life, not enough to justify nostalgia. Somehow, an image of him as he is now has gotten stuck inside my head. My disgust at his adult diapers, the scrape of kissing his sharp, scruffy cheek, the empty eyes of a man who was once the smartest person I knew. Perhaps this will be the winter of the final phone call, telling me he no longer waits by the phone for anyone. How do you say goodbye to a father you've already abandoned? Tucked in my closet is his old plaid coat, which I can neither bear to wear nor to throw away. It no longer smells of his warm neck, but the scratch on my cheek is the same. In an effort to shut off my yearning, I focus on my white teddy bear. It was a Christmas gift from my grandmother the last year of my childhood, when I said I only wanted clothes, but she somehow knew that deep inside I needed a toy one last season. I remember the empty bed and my father's voice as he told me he gave the bear to his then wife's granddaughter. That was 2 wives ago, and I wasn't invited to that wedding either, though she sent me a card the year after the divorce. I try not to think about the way Dad's hands looked as they grasped the smooth brown tiller as he taught me to sail. His fingers red and the backs of his hands ropey with the same veins as on my own. The lilt in his voice as he taught me this one beloved thing. I haven't sailed in years. The last time I was on a boat, I refused to turn at the helm. What was the point in it? Instead, I try to remember the postcards Dad sent when he took other people's children on vacation and I sat home alone. I want to recall the stuffy stillness of a house with an unringing phone. On my birthday, when I passed my road test, when my heart was broken or my dog died, or the time I won the 100-yard dash. So many silences. But I always remembered the names of my friends, though we never met them. The problem is that the space I made when I walked away is filled with the echoes of his voice, calling for me now that he is old and alone. The other children he chose over me don't want him either, not that they ever did. It was always their mothers who forced them on each other. And as for me, I was never enough for him to choose. No matter who was smarter, prettier, did better in school. Perhaps my inescapable failure birthed my apathy. I never was very good at having goals besides having a family of my own. I gave up trying to win at anything back in 9th grade, and it wasn't until I became a mother that I allowed myself to dream again. But Facebook shows him smiling with other people's children, while my own sister wasn't invited to Thanksgiving, even though her son had died just 3 months before. I flew across the country for the funeral, and my father spent the morning at his step-granddaughter's 3rd birthday and was late for the service. Life is for the living, he said. Weren't my sister and I still alive? He meant to be there earlier. It was not his fault it started to rain. I picture myself made of bronze, my cheek cold, my ears sealed shut. I wish and hope to be that taciturn and strong, but I am made of flesh and my heart still beats for him, though I tell myself over and over not to give in. And still, I know I will mail gifts again this year, and I will have to answer the phone on Christmas and New Year's and his birthday. And I know his faded voice will yearn for me, and still I will make excuses and hang up as soon as 8 minutes are done. The next essay is called An Illustrative Example. I loved the Anchorage airport. Glass cases held taxidermied animals, moose and a giant polar bear standing on its hind legs. Normally, I walked out of the jetway and Dad was right there. Sometimes my brother and I had to walk to the end of the terminal to find him, but the airport was small. When I was somewhere between 9 and 12, I flew to Alaska alone, which wasn't unusual. Our winter visits were often alone time with Dad. What was unusual was that Dad wasn't at the end of the jetway, nor in the main terminal, nor at baggage claim. It was okay, though. I knew the procedure. I stood at the conveyor belt watching for my blue Samsonite suitcase. When I saw it, I pulled it off one-handed, then moved to a corner to wait for Dad, just like a grown-up. How much longer? How much longer? How much longer? I had looked at the calendar with longing for months and waited to see him again. And I counted every excruciatingly long hour on every excruciatingly long flight and every excruciatingly long layover, watching the hour hand move me closer to Dad as the time zones moved me farther from my mother until she and I were 4 hours apart, and my father and I were minutes away from each other. But minutes piled up and turned into hours, and still he did not come. All the passengers from my flight left, and then another flight's worth of baggage circled on the conveyor belt, and still I waited. I couldn't see the polar bear or any of the other animals from my perch on my battered and duct-taped suitcase, but I didn't wander off to look for them. I didn't read a book. I just scanned the crowd for my father's beard and black sea captain hat. How much longer? How much longer? How much longer? Eventually, an airport employee tapped me on the shoulder and wanted to know who I was waiting for. I gave her Dad's name, but I didn't know his office number or the name of his practice. But she was resourceful and knew someone who knew someone and was able to track him down after a few calls. He'd forgotten I was coming that day. I didn't understand because I had spoken to him the night before. We always called the night before to make sure everything was arranged, just like I had practiced calling Mom Collect to make sure I knew how to do it in case of emergency. Of course, this wasn't an emergency, so I hadn't called her. I was sure Dad would come. I didn't understand that he hadn't been counting the days, hours, or minutes between us. I didn't understand that my love for my father was like balancing my small body on a teeter-totter against his larger weight. I was always floating, leaning back, squirming to make something work on my own, when all I needed was for him to put down one foot to keep us in balance. This one is called "The Boat Was Always the Best Part of My Father." Steam rose from Dad's damp wool jacket in the Alaskan summer morning. The air was what I called no temperature, neither hot nor cold, the Arctic sun flashing on the snow patches that always remained on the mountain peaks. His thick knuckled hands gripped the knob of the tiller as he steered the boat. Under the brim of his black captain's hat, his glacier blue eyes twinkled inside crow's feet. His lips, thin like mine, curved upwards beneath his neatly combed beard. His feet were steady on the gray wooden deck, his knees loose to take up the sway as he sailed the Ghost. Ghost he was to me, drifting in and out of my life, but most firmly anchored when bobbing on the currents of the jade green water of Prince William Sound. The cry of seagulls, the acrid scent of sea lions. Off in the distance, orcas breached. Porpoises swam alongside, crisscrossing under the bow. He read us stories and poems and taught us to play the auto harp, and I danced on the bow as it rocked side to side, bending into as much of the choreography from ballet class as I could remember, making up what I didn't. Proud that my body blended with the rhythm of the waves, the breathing of the earth. My feet never faltered. I never feared falling overboard. The sway was part of me, unnoticed as I danced, read, or slept. I was never braver than when I was in Alaska under my father's gaze. And the last one I'll read is called Eclipse. The problem was, he acted as if I delighted him, as if I were fascinating, smart, capable, and then he'd vanish. And then he'd call me and tell me how delightful, smart, and capable his stepchildren were. How happy he was to get a second chance at being a father, how he got to do all the things with them, these delightful new children, that he never did with me. I didn't know how to be delightful without him. Do you remember the way your cheek would sweat next to a hard telephone receiver? Do you remember all those little holes in the mouthpiece of a landline phone? How sometimes all the words you wanted to say floated away instead of falling into those little holes and racing across the telephone lines to your father's ears? The words, "I still need you," somehow couldn't escape my mouth, fit into those holes, travel to my father's ears all the way in Alaska. I won't let them bubble up inside me now. I'm 47. It is time to move on. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing those beautiful words. And now we're going to move to David, and you can read from your pieces and tell us a little bit about your work.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for hosting this. This is wonderful. My upcoming novel that comes out February 6th with Unsolicited Press is called In Wells Time. It's my second novel, and it came to be kind of after 3-4 years ago, sort of one of these wake up at night and then can't get back to bed, mind racing, sort of panic attack moments. I don't really have difficulty with anxiety too much, but this was definitely a moment where it felt like my heart was going, and sort of fell into this thought process of time is moving so fast, and my kids are growing up, and eternity and space and all those big things, and I was jogging a lot at the time, and I started just thinking of this story, and these characters came to life. So this is about a family who's dealing with the death of their brother, and as he's in his 30s, and they sort of learn that there's a family trait that gives them a unique outlook on time, I guess I'll say. So this is one of the earlier chapters in the book. Just what do you think you're doing under that tree? Charles Monosmith walked into the dim living room where his mischievous son was poised to expose all of the Christmas surprises he and Margaret had planned. It was endearing, really. 7-year-old Wells hopped to his feet, startled by his dad's voice. "You scared me." Wells balled up his fists and stamped his foot on the old wooden floor, which creaked like a tree under the weight of snow. For a moment, Wells thought he was going to celebrate Christmas all by himself. In fact, he had completely forgotten his family existed as he sat on his knees, hovering over the small mountain of treasures glistening in the dim cabin. "Shh," Charles winced, looking toward the bedrooms, holding a finger to his lips. The last thing he needed was the rest of the kids waking up and digging at the presents beneath the tree, too. "I didn't mean to scare you." Seeing Wells pinching his crotch, Charles asked the obvious question, "Do you have to pee?" "Dad, I think Santa came." Wells ignored the urgent plea from his bladder. His voice was filled with excitement, but his gaze was hard and intense. His belief in Santa was as solid as the roof above them and the snow falling on the windowsill. "You're right, he did, but we have to wait until tomorrow when everyone wakes up, okay? Can I just open one?" "No, I'm sorry, buddy. Even if we wrapped it back up, I think the girls would find out and be pretty jealous, especially your mother. She's too smart for that. How about you just go potty and I'll see you in the morning?" Wells groaned and started to walk away. "Fine," he said as he closed the bathroom door. His mind spun, considering what treasures might be resting under the tree: a remote-controlled car, chocolate, a slingshot, more chocolate, a Nintendo. He felt anger swirling in his tummy. If I could just open one single gift, it would be the best Christmas ever. It was absolutely worth asking one more time. He finished peeing, wiped the seat, and flushed the toilet. He skipped the hand washing, no one would know. When he got to the tree, his dad had gone back to bed. The room was empty. The presents were stacked like the building blocks of a haphazard city. He could hear the ticking cuckoo clock on the wall, an old German relic that scared all of his sisters when it called out in the middle of the night. His mom had spent all day admiring it. Wells thought if only his dad came back, he would shove all of his desire into one final plea. He balled his fists and shook his head, trying to make it happen. With his eyes squeezed shut tight, he could hear the heavy wind beating against the side of the cabin. Wells loosened his fists and opened his eyes. The room was silent. The clock had stopped ticking. It must need winding, Wells thought. But then it occurred to him that if it wasn't ticking, it wouldn't chime, and the only ticking he could hear was his heart counting off the seconds. The cabin was lost in hibernation. Even the gusts swirling around the corners of the little log building had settled down. He decided to chance it. Just one present. He needed so badly to see beneath the wrapping paper. Wells cautiously approached the tree, pushing through the glow of the night to a medium-sized square package with his name written in swirling letters. Santa's elves have the best handwriting, he thought. He carefully peeled the tape away and lifted the paper to see a small box set of Topps baseball cards, a picture of Miguel Cabrera staring back from the chrome packaging. Wells' excitement took control of his hands, and his hands got the best of him. Before he knew it, he tore through every single present, fueling his pleasure with a stick of Rolos that was stuffed into a pair of fleece socks. As he chewed on the chocolatey caramels, his eyes got heavy. The piles of crumpled paper covered his flannel pajamas, and his chin nodded to his chest. As his mind slipped away into a dark river of sleep, his subconscious noted the clock beginning to tick again, and the chime rang once. The girls stirred at the sound, but didn't wake. Charles had only just walked back to his bedroom to lie down when he heard Wells flush the toilet. He had to pee now, too, his nightly ritual since his late 30s. He smiled to himself, loving the classic memory his son had just created. A young child waking up to a tower of presents beneath a tree. This was exactly the type of core memory he and Margaret had wanted their kids to have when they rented the cabin. Magic moments seasoned with sights, aromas, and emotions that could be recalled throughout a lifetime. Charles turned back around and moved toward the bedroom door. He clicked the Indiglo button on his watch and saw 12:59:52. As Charles walked into the living room, the old clock on the wall announced 1 a.m. His eyes widened at the scene and his heart stopped. This was not a Christmas memory Charles Monosmith would This was a Christmas memory Charles Monosmith would certainly never forget. Unfortunately, this was a memory he hoped would never be made. Wells sat asleep with candy in his hand, and nearly all of the presents had been unwrapped. There must have been 25 gifts spread around him. All of the girls' presents, a necklace for Margaret, a new pair of mittens for Charles. It must have happened sometime in the last 10 seconds. The father crumpled into a recliner near his son and cried into his hands. He now knew his time with his son was on a shorter string. When his tears did their job of temporarily lifting the weight that he now carried, he picked up his little boy and walked toward the bunk beds. Weld laid his head on Charles' shoulder as he walked, and then stayed asleep the rest of the night. Charles returned to the tree and rewrapped the presents the best he could. He decided not to tell Margaret until the morning. The night would seem a lot longer if she had to process what he now knew for certain.
Wow. So thank you all for reading. And now my head is swirling with questions. So all of you have incredible imagery in your pieces. So perhaps each of you could talk about the imagery and how you came to the metaphors. And for Doug's, I'm remembering the kid on the train who either slipped or fell. So I want to know, was that totally imagined, or was it something that you actually saw? Is that any biography in there?
You want to know if it's true or not?
Yeah. And I'll ask all of you, and then you can all answer. And Lara, the image of you dancing on the boat in Sway without falling, that was really fantastic. And I already know that yours is creative nonfiction, but I want to know if there was any license taken with that. And for David, I really would like to know more about the time, like how the time functions in your story. So let's hear what everyone says.
It's a work of fiction, prose poetry, peopled with real people. No, we did not witness a killing, a death, not a killing. Well, I guess, but for some reason that we did used to swing on a rope over a train. It could have happened, and so I suppose that the fact that it could have happened always stayed in my mind. Anyway, so I don't know why. I don't know. I can't tell you why that kept, haunting me, and then why I put it in there. Stuff does, right? Chunks of your memory is the kind of just stick to you like barnacles, and eventually you hack it off. And process of art, look at it. And these poems in the upcoming, the collection from which that one you mentioned comes from, those are all written within like the last 4 to 5 years. So usually in my poetry, and even I'd say to a certain degree in some of the fiction too, I like kind of keeping the historical point a little obscure. You're not quite sure what point in history it is. But I think, like with what I've got in this cabin at the end of the world, I think it absolutely has the stamp of the last 3 to 5 years on it. So you can kind of imagine, all your, everything we've kind of experienced getting condensed down and like shoved inside of these weird little also memory shells that become the poems. Yeah, that's kind of what's been going on, it's different for me. A lot of times, I like to work from memory. I like memories just kind of are this beautiful cachet of things that kind of, for what, beautiful and horrible, they are ready to get low-hanging fruit in a way. But the fun part's making it up, right? The fun part of all of these is what you imagine along the way. Yeah.
So, Laura, do you want to talk about your dancing on the boat? Like, is that a real memory, or is that something that just came from the alchemy of sitting and writing?
No. It actually happened. So this book is different from all of the books I've written before. This is my third memoir or essay collection, and before I would always write a couple hours at a time. And when the pandemic hit, I lost my words, and I couldn't. And I told myself, Ernest Hemingway, just write one true sentence. And I was mentoring another writer through AWP's Writer to Writer program. And I felt like if I was expecting her to write, I had to write too. So I went from writing 2,000 words in a sitting to writing maybe 50 words, maybe 100 words. If I was really lucky, 300 words. And then slowly I cobbled them together, and they became a book. And so, I'm 50 now. So when I look back at my life, so much is sort of a blur. But the boat, the dancing on the foredeck was a clear, true sentence that I could write without too much difficulty. So I sort of started from there and went out.
A beautiful, beautiful, heartbreaking essays that I think a lot of it resonates with a lot of people, because a lot of people have had those absent parents, whether they're moms or dads, and they hang on the wanting to see them. And so David brings us to, I don't know if you saw in the newspaper recently, but there was actually a case where a toddler did get up in the middle of the night. It was in the news all over the place on Christmas Eve, and unwrapped everybody's presents under the tree, and the parents themselves together wrapped the presents back up so that the other children would not see that their toddler son. I don't know if you saw that in the news, but you must have channeled that long before this actually happened. So can you talk about the function of time in your book? Because obviously it's very important. We hear the cuckoo clock ring. The father notes the time. The son hears the first chime. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because that also is imagery, how you sort of weave it in.
Yeah. There's a poem that I read so early on when I was just starting to think about this story, and how I wanted to explore characters and time. I read a few things. I think there's oh gosh, I can't remember the name of it, but it's like Einstein's something. It's a bunch of just different theories on how time could work different ways. Maybe the closer you are to an object, the slower time moves, and the further away. It's all this relative, just stuff like that. And so I started thinking about that, and then there's a poem by Charles Bukowski, Nirvana, which is awesome, and I think I had heard it through maybe a different podcast or something, but that one sort of stuck with me about this idea of finding a perfect moment and the concept of sort of obsessing over that. So what I ended up settling on, I want that to be through there and throughout the whole book. And then I think about how even everything has a density to it. Coffee, espresso is just packed with caffeine and flavor versus something watered like Norwegian coffee, which is eggshells and weak, and you can drink it all day at church, or something like, it just how those things are different, and neither of them are right or wrong. But I settled on the way it's like, how could I make this believable and work? Because I wanted it to work as much as something magical could, and the idea if someone could freeze a moment and live within it. I settled on the idea of an X-linked trait, so that would be passed down maternally. If you think of like a calico cat that has then has mosaicism and expresses these things differently, that would mean that Wells, who is a carrier but only he has just the one X chromosome, fully expresses this ability. The cost, because everything has a cost, is that it's hard on your body, just like adrenaline junkies and drug use and anything else could be. And then the women in his family have different levels of ways of expressing it, and I think his three sisters represent sort of different versions of myself in a way, and what they value in life and professional and emotional and family and just different stuff. And so they all have maybe different ways that they can tap into it too a little bit. But so it's some of it, I have a habit of I kind of just start writing, and I don't always know where it's going. So I knew where it started. In this case, I knew that he died, so I knew that that's how it starts, which is also kind of the ending. So
yes.
It worked out. It works out that way. So I don't know if that helps answer or not, but that's kind of how it started and where I explored it.
So you talked about something like just start writing, and Laura sort of mentioned that too. These past couple of years have been hard on a lot of people, writers or not, and some writers felt their words escaped them. I actually fit in that category. And then other writers kind of used the pandemic as a time to create and, and sort of create more and more books. So I'm wondering how each of you, what is your process for writing? Like, how do you actually approach it? Do you have a disciplined time? My best friend gets up at 5 a.m. and writes till 6:30 every morning because she's a working mom. She has 3 kids. I write some in the morning and some in the evening. So what is your approach to the writing, to the project, and how do you manage that, especially when we go through things like, we have families that we're dealing with, jobs perhaps that we're dealing with. So what is each of your approaches to the discipline of, or the act of writing? Anybody can start.
Laura,
I will say the best writing is when I get up and I know what I want to write, and I start writing before I check my email, before I listen to the news, before I do anything. But that rarely happens. So often, you open your email and then you're just gone for the day. But one thing that I try to do is have sort of at least for my first draft, have a list of particular things that I want to write about. So when I go to start writing, when I don't know, what I want to say, I have something to start. And that makes it easier, and it makes it more exciting for me to get going.
So Doug, how do you approach the task of looking at that blank page?
Yeah. I remember in my early 20s, I sort of made this disciplinary decision, and I said, I'm gonna do something every day, no matter what. And I remember and if I've got nothing, I'm just gonna write sounds. I'm just gonna write sounds. And my thought was just make it a discipline to always every day put my mind in the space of listening to language and then move my way out. And if there's a story and I'm ready to hop on the train, just write it. That's great. Or if something pops into my head, I'll just go with it. But every day, and I love that, and just varying degrees, I've maintained that, as turbulent as life gets, right? But yeah, when I've got something I'm working on that's like in the revision stage, like I think it's just luxurious to like schedule it like any job. Okay, it gets from 10 to noon every day regardless. That's what it gets. And I work my schedule out. I also teach, so it allows me a certain freedom to manipulate my schedule. And I just find, and I love it. And that means every day I get on it and I'm working on it. And it doesn't even matter. It's just the time. It doesn't matter how many pages I get. And it just, and when I've got that, I feel like I'm on a solid vessel. And when other times it's a little bit kind of, the ground's a little more watery, but I don't mind. I ride that too. And just every day, yeah, do a little bit, enjoy it, read a little bit and write a little bit every day, whatever it is, and just kind of relish it because it's fun. What a thing to get to do.
It is fun. And also, David, how do you approach it? Because you said some of these ideas came to you when you were jogging.
Yeah, my mind is out. I feel like sometimes I'm always just racing in a way. And I have lots of creative outlets. I'm sort of a hobby collector in a way, like I was a songwriter first before I ever decided I even had the silly idea to write a book. And that was a thing. And so I write, and I like to, I drive up to the North Shore and collect agates, and I like to, spoon carving, and I've got some woodblock printing. So there's just lots of stuff. So I think I have a habit of probably when something gets hard, when I kind of run up against something, writing wise, it's like, that's then where I spend if I'm on a jog, that's what I'm sort of thinking about. Or if I'm just, digging into a piece of wood, or even if I'm writing a song about a different topic, it's just still creative energy, I guess, that just keeps that muscle moving. It's like, cross training or something, I guess. And so that really helps me. I'm a late night worker for sure. I don't, I'm okay with like little sleep. And my wife is like lots of sleep person, which is sort of convenient for now because my kids still don't stay up too late. But so there's a couple hours I get where I'll sit down and I just kind of follow things. If I'm really into something writing, it's sort of like, thanks to like Google Drive or something, it can follow me wherever I go. And I'm just like, we might be talking right now and I'm nodding along, but really I'm going like, oh, okay, they're doing the thing, and which I should be more present, or I could be more present. But so yeah, like you said, I think it's exciting. What a gift to be able to do this. So so far, even though I have lots of false starts and things that I stop at and ideas that don't seem to work out, I like just creating is fun. And
it's like the process of learning. So the other thing I was wondering about is, how did you know that these books that you're working on that are forthcoming, like how did you know what structure that you wanted to use in each book? And like you said, your essays were really, some of them were really small, and that's kind of like a really big thing now. Jennifer Egan did that a little bit in her book, where she had these really short paragraphs, and these chapters, some of them were only a couple of lines, some of them were only a paragraph. So how did you, like, I believe each work dictates its own structure. So talk a little bit about how you approach the structure of the books that are forthcoming. Lara, do you want to start, since you talked about how your essays are a little bit fitting into that Jennifer Egan type style?
Yeah, so I don't know. I have found over time that my weird writing is my best writing. Um, with my first book, um, uh, and I don't want to talk too much about it, but structurally it's sort of interesting because it's a memoir, but I chose to write the majority of it in third person, which is not a choice you normally see in memoir. And I knew I was making it less marketable, but I knew it was the only way that I could tell my story properly and get distance from my child self and show my parents as three-dimensional characters. And I guess for me, with this book, I felt like I didn't really have a choice. Like the part of me that could write long essays was broken, like it was just gone. Um, and I just started collecting these little moments and text messages. Um, and, you know, they just sort of built on each other. A wonderful book is Heating and Cooling by, I want to say Suzanne Finney. I hope that's the right name. But they're 52 micro memoir that each essay is like a couple of inches on a page. But they build together like a mosaic. And I just kept sort of thinking to myself, and this is going to sound really sort of dumb, but I would play this puzzle game on my phone where you would have to like do these pipes around each other. And I would sort of try and think about that when I was writing, like the balance between the good stories and the sad stories. And, I was told once about my writing that, readers would want to kill themselves before they got 20 pages in. So I had to sort of be aware that, not about this book, but about something else. But I had to be aware that you have to have that light in the dark. And you have to step back and say, with nonfiction, like, is this an honest representation? Because no people are all evil, right? Like, no people are all good. Like, is this a good balance of who my father was to me? And then I sent it out and I said, I don't know if anyone else will like it, but to me, it's the only way I could write this book. And it felt incredibly honest and like everything I had to say. And an interesting aside on that is that after Unsolicited Press picked it up, there was a 2-year window before it would come out, and my father died during that time, which changed the ending of the book, and made me a lot less fearful about it, to be honest. So it was interesting. I think that with nonfiction, you keep living, so things are always changing. But at a certain point, you just have to stop and say, okay, that takes me to the moment that I've said what I need to say. I don't know if I answered your question, but I said a lot of words, and that counts for something.
So I wanted to get back to David, because David, I noticed the point of view in your book slipped in between the father and the son. So it was omniscient. Was that a deliberate choice, or how did you come? A lot of American writers tend not to write in omniscient. There's only very few. So could you talk about that a little bit?
I have one luxury of not being very like well read or taught, so I don't know that a lot of American writers don't do that. But I know, so with what I wanted to do, because I had siblings and this matriarch and patriarch of this family, everybody uses time differently, so I wanted to show everybody perspective. And so I had fun trying to, the chapters are different people as we move through, so there's the whole first section is, it starts with at the funeral, and then they move to their house, and the sisters, it's their trip coming there, talking to their husbands or kids, or they're solo. And there's a young girl who's going through a lot of different stuff. And then it's, the father and mother prepping the home. And there's a couple chaotic scenes where things are happening multiple times just from different perspectives. And so, but I felt like that was a fun way to really show just how people are living, whether they're thoughtful about it or not, how mindful they're being. And then it goes into essentially it's like a memoir. It's and of this character, kind of this journal sort of saying, each chapter will be introduced. It says, "Hey, family, do you remember that time? Well, this is kind of what I was going through." And then all of a sudden it goes into more of a third person story. And so it's this, it just felt like the natural way to share each person's
perspective or
lifestyle,
point of view.
choices,
Yeah.
and what they value. So that's kind of how that structure came about. It was fun. It required there was a lot of times I realized I had to, like, in the editing process, like, oh, this didn't match and this name wasn't right. And because you're showing the same scene from a different, perspective. Making
The
sure
cohesiveness and continuity had to be straight. And also, Doug, I noticed you have prose poems and the other ones with very they're almost like slice of life. The cop, the kids, the people that we think of stereotypes. So how did you come to structure how did you choose prose poems over, other kinds of forms?
Well, the prose poems were something I was consciously doing more, like I said, in these last couple of years. I was very interested. I was reading some Charles Simic prose poetry. I was reading some Mary Oliver stuff. I was reading some Joy Harjo. Who else was I reading? Anyway, Franz Wright, son of James Wright, only father and son to both win the Pulitzer. Little fact. Anyway, and the prose poem just struck me as this beautiful hybrid. Everybody talks about hybrids now, but that really was what it is. The prose poem is kind of a hybrid. It's a little essay. It's a little story. And yet you still have lines. And I've always and I wanted to also lengthen my lines. In my other poetry, in my other poetry books, my lines were a little more broken and stanzaic. And I wanted to work with the longer line. I was thinking like Walt Whitman, long line, and I was thinking like Charles Olson, the Black Mountain poets, and in the South, who talk about, the line of a poem should be a full breath. And I was interested in that big blocky kind of a prose poem that would also be under the rigor of each line. And I love Theodore Rettke has this line. He says, every line of a poem should be a poem. And I thought, okay, let's marshal all that and try and keep all that and make each one of these happen. And so that's where the prose poetry idea came. And I realized it's not something I had really worked on before. And I wanted to give myself an assignment to work on prose poems. And so that's how the initial gathering came together. And so the prose poems, and of course, I'm not writing only prose poems all the time, but the ones that sort of were in that camp would just sort of migrate over. And then I had certain titles. I love this question, if you don't mind, because I was just talking to S.R. Stewart, our editor, about this just recently, about how the fun part about editing, especially, is watching and realizing some of my intuitive moves sort of making sense as I start more consciously going through structure and deciding where do poems go, what are sections going to be titled, and within a section, how do I build and how do they work in relation to the other sections rhythmically and in terms of intensity and and humor, having a little humor and balancing that out with weirdness. And so all of that, then a lot of that you can't do totally consciously. You just got to really work by ear, for me. But then but that's the beautiful part about the editing and working with an editor outside yourself is then you step outside yourself. I step outside myself and look at it more outside. And again, and then make choices and look at structure. And so that was a very fun and interesting process. And now when I look at it, I go, yes. Like I was telling Summer, the first three chapters end with a long poem, and each one gets a little bit longer, and each one gets a little weirder. And I hadn't intended that. I started watching that happening, and I was going, but that works. Good job. And you, who's no longer me, I think of that. I don't even feel like I get the credit. I got to go back. The guy who did it before me, I'm just inheriting this. It's kind of lucky.
Well, one of the things I noticed about all of your work is they're all mosaic-like. They're all taking little bits and pieces of whether it's an experience or other people or whatever. So that your book has in common is the mosaicness of the human condition. And I can't wait for people to pick up your books and read them. They can buy them off of the pre-order page at Unsolicited Press at unsolicitedpress.com. So we have only one more minute to end the show. So I would like to thank you all for participating. Lara?
I just wanted to say that I had the author wrong of Heating and Cooling. It's Beth Ann Fennelly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. And I want to say goodbye to our audience. Goodbye. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, PR, for your comment. And join us next in 2 Wednesdays for our next Literary Nights with Unsolicited Press. So goodbye, everyone, and thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good night, all.